On March 1, 2022, a gruesome discovery was made on the banks of the River Weser, a suitcase containing severed human remains. Authorities soon identified the victim, 32-year-old Ekaterina Baumann. The mother of one had gone missing the month prior amidst a contentious divorce from her 43-year-old husband, Walter. As the investigators peeled back the layers of the horrendous crime, they uncovered a twisted tale of abuse and control. This is the story of Ekaterina Baumann. Ekaterina Bulgova was born on May 13, 1989, in one of Russia's largest cities, St. Petersburg. In 2009, 20-year-old Ekaterina traveled to Turkey with her family, where she met up with Walter Baumann. Walter, a German citizen who was fluent in Russian, having been brought up in Kazakhstan, ended up proposing to Ekaterina a week later. Some reports have suggested the pair knew each other beforehand after dating online. Ekaterina and Walter didn't really make much sense as a couple. Those who knew Ekaterina were confused by why she would marry a man substantially older than her and seemingly not in the same league in terms of looks. Ekaterina was a beautiful young woman with doll-like features and piercing blue eyes. She attracted attention wherever she went. Walter was the opposite. He didn't have much luck with women before meeting and marrying Ekaterina, with some even commenting on his lack of hygiene. Regardless of this, Ekaterina and Walter got married in 2010 with their fairy tale wedding in Germany. After they were married, Ekaterina moved in with Walter, who had been living with his parents. This living arrangement was far from easy for Ekaterina. Walter's mother, Ludmila Baumann, wasn't the nicest woman to be around. Walter was her only child, and she put him up on a pedestal. When he was out with Ekaterina, she would call him repeatedly trying to find out where he was and when he would be home. Keep in mind, he was in his 30s at this stage, a full-grown adult man who should be able to go out without constant checkups from his mother. Ekaterina tried to leave a good impression on Ludmila, but nothing she did was ever good enough. Not only did her mother-in-law constantly criticize her, she also tried to undermine her marriage by telling Walter that his wife was incapable of many things. In 2017, Walter purchased a small house away from his family after learning his wife was pregnant with their first child. Ekaterina hoped the move would give her some breathing room from the overly critical mother-in-law, but Ludmila instead visited frequently. The constant meddling was putting a strain on the relationship between Ekaterina and Walter, which I suppose is what Ludmila wanted, to have a son to herself. When the couple's daughter was born, things got worse fast. When Victoria was born in 2017, a switch seemed to flip for Walter, as he became increasingly abusive and controlling. Walter began monitoring his wife's movements, even setting up CCTV cameras throughout the home. When friends or family would visit, they found the whole setup very strange. Tensions were rising, and the living situation was horrible for Ekaterina. As the months went by, Walter seemed to develop a hatred for his wife. She was yelled at for things like handing him the wrong piece of cutlery and even wiping her mouth in a certain way after finishing dinner. When the abuse turned physical, Ekaterina knew she had to leave, fleeing her home and taking up residence in a women's refuge. She would do this twice, coming back each time, hoping their relationship could be salvaged. In 2019, the authorities got involved when they were alerted to a domestic altercation in the Baumann home. Unfortunately, nothing came of this, as the case was closed after Ekaterina explained she was working things out with her husband. Walter wanted to paint Ekaterina out as the bad guy, the one who said abusive things to him and started the arguments. In order to do this, he would secretly record her when they were fighting. Of course, he never recorded any of the physical abuse he put her through. Walter was employed in the IT industry, but despite this knowledge, he lacked the ability to hack into his wife's phone. Instead, he tried to get one of his friends to do so, but they refused. Walter knew how to convince Ekaterina he would change after they would have a particularly bad fight. He gave her gifts, took her and Victoria on holidays, and promised he would change. Walter said he couldn't live without his wife and daughter. On the few occasions that Ekaterina returned to Russia to visit family, Walter insisted he travel with her. This was out of fear that she would take Victoria and not return. He knew his wife was slowly slipping from his grasp, a controlling, abusive man's worst nightmare. Ekaterina slowly came to the conclusion that how she was living was not healthy, both physically and mentally. But, as some of you may know, the most dangerous time for a woman in an abusive relationship is when she tries to leave. When Ekaterina started to gather up the relevant documents she would need to begin divorce proceedings, she discovered that many of them had vanished. Immediately, she suspected Walter was involved, a suspicion that was very much true. Walter had taken the documents and hidden them at his mother's house. In the lead-up to Ekaterina's disappearance, the situation between her and Walter was the worst it had ever been. Walter had cut his work hours down significantly so he could spend more time with Victoria, dropping her off at school, picking her up again in the afternoon, and having her sleep in their bedroom at night. As the arguments increased, social services were made aware of the hostile environment Victoria was living in. This led to Walter and Ekaterina having to go through a month and a half of parental support and education. A family crisis counselor monitored the family throughout this time and ended up deciding that Victoria was not safe to be living in the family home. Ekaterina wished she would return to Russia to be nearer to her relatives and support system, but Walter would not allow her to take Victoria with her. This meant that Ekaterina stayed in Germany only for her daughter, fearing to leave her with her father. In August 2021, Ekaterina took Victoria and went to a women's shelter. She told the volunteers that she was fearing for her life. Social services stepped in and wanted to take Victoria away from both Ekaterina and Walter by putting her up in an orphanage. Ekaterina knew the home environment wasn't right for her daughter, so she agreed that she be put in foster care until she could get away from Walter. Walter, on the other hand, disagreed with this. With the help of his mother, he managed to get a shared custody agreement between him and Ekaterina. Victoria would spend a few days with her father in the home she grew up in and then go back to Ekaterina at the women's shelter. For whatever reason, Ekaterina ended up moving back in with Walter after some time. She had no intention of continuing their relationship, though. They were now in the process of getting a divorce and sleeping in separate rooms. At the end of 2021 into early 2022, Ekaterina finally visited home again, although her daughter remained in Germany. While she was in Russia, Ekaterina went on a date with a Russian pilot. They hit it off, and when she returned to Germany in mid-January, the pair continued speaking over the phone. But on February 4th, 2022, Ekaterina ceased all communication with the man. This sudden silence seemed to come out of nowhere, with none of the conversations leading up to that day hinting at Ekaterina wanting to stop talking to him. On February 6th, Walter Baumann went to the police and told them his wife had run away. He claimed Ekaterina took 13,000 euros with her and an empty suitcase. A massive search followed, with law enforcement not writing off Ekaterina's disappearance as her simply running away. Her mother knew she would never not have told her plans to leave Walter, let alone leave her daughter behind. People put up posters across the city, asking for anyone passing by to be on the lookout for the missing mother of one. While others pulled together alongside law enforcement to find Ekaterina, Walter made little effort to find his wife. Instead, he focused on renovations going on at his home. Only a few days after Ekaterina was last seen, the police visited the Baumann home. They could see that Walter had just completed some recent renovations. The guest room had been entirely repainted and the living room couch was replaced. The investigating officers hoped all of the CCTV footage throughout the home would help point them to what truly happened. So when they discovered that footage had been conveniently erased, their focus was well and truly on Walter Baumann. The search for Ekaterina continued with no luck. Her story soon reached the Russian media, who told her story with the help of her family members. Ekaterina's mother didn't speak fondly of Walter, saying he isolated his daughter and tried to keep her away from her family. On March 1st, 2022, the search came to a gruesome ending. A suitcase was found on the banks of the River Weser. It seemed to have washed ashore. A passerby spotted it and walked down to the river's edge, slowly unzipping the bag to see what was inside. That is when he found the dismembered body of a woman. In shock, he quickly dialed the authorities, who were swiftly on the scene. Once a thorough examination was completed, they confirmed the body in the suitcase belonged to the 32-year-old Ekaterina Baumann. In some sort of twisted fate, her body was found not far from the very spot she got married. It was a stroke of luck that the suitcase had even washed onto the bank, as it could have washed out to sea. If that had happened, we would likely never have known what happened to her. During her autopsy, the coroner found Ekaterina had a strong sedative in her system at the time of her death. A bottle of that same sedative was uncovered in the Baumann home when it was searched for a second time. Along with the sedative, the investigators found disposable gloves, tape, and multiple garbage bags. They also noticed that Walter had erased much of Ekaterina's presence in the home. Most of her items were nowhere to be seen, and the framed photos from their wedding were hidden away. It wasn't long before Walter Baumann was taken into custody. While he was there, he wrote frequent letters to his mother, Ludmila. As the authorities continued to piece together Ekaterina's last movements, they found she had gone for a short walk at around 4:30 p.m. on February 4th. This was proved by a neighbor's surveillance footage. When she got back to the house, she had dinner, which consisted of fish, mashed potatoes, and olives. Ekaterina washed that down with a glass of wine. Walter claimed she had just one glass and he drank the rest, which is why he fell asleep early that night. Ekaterina was on her phone into the evening, even FaceTiming her lover at 8:25 p.m. He later said she was in a good mood during the call, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. When she hung up the call, she told him she would be calling back in a bit after putting Victoria to bed. That call never came. Later forensic examinations of Ekaterina's body would show that she died around 2 hours after eating dinner. They also determined she had died due to strangulation. Experts believe Walter then cut up Ekaterina's body the next morning. His car left home at 10:20 a.m. on February 5th, only returning much later in the afternoon. He pretended to dial his wife's phone in the days after her death in an attempt to convince the authorities that he had nothing to do with her disappearance. His search history, on the other hand, showed something entirely different. In the months leading up to her death, Walter searched over 400 worrying terms. This ranged from effects of acid on living tissues and what acid breaks down skin to sleeping pills, barbiturates, and diazepam. On January 26th, he searched the phrase diazepam per kilogram of body weight. When questioned about this, Walter claimed he was concerned that Ekaterina could poison him. Additional searches included lie detector results accepted by German courts and stun gun. When Walter was brought in front of the court, Ludmila made a shocking claim, saying she was the one who drugged and killed Ekaterina. Prosecutors working to convict Walter didn't believe her, though. This seemed like yet another instance of Ludmila trying to do everything for her son, even helping him get away with murder. But that didn't mean the prosecutions didn't believe Ludmila played some role in the crime. They theorized that she likely helped her son get rid of Ekaterina's body, as she had shown up to his house several times on February 5th. Once the trial concluded, Walter Baumann was sentenced to a minimum term of 15 years behind bars, after which he will be considered for parole. The likelihood of him getting out is slim, though, based on the nature of the crime committed. Ludmila was never charged.